generally in basketball, they are identifying that talent. As you see, a lot more of the younger kids now that are playing over in the States. So I think they're doing a better job of what they may have done in the past.
All right. Nice to talk to you, Brendan. Thank you, Brendan Pongia, on the panel.
Can I make a point here? I'm just looking at someone's copy of Stephen Adams' book, and I think there is a fairly practical reason why his parents possibly could not afford to spend the money on him. I'm looking at a picture here. He appears to have 13 brothers and sisters.
He does.
Yes.
He does.
Big family.
Very big family.
Well,
yeah. Can I also say, though, that Basketball New Zealand now is much better resourced, and partly as a result of people like Stephen Adams, who have built New Zealand's reputation in basketball. And it's quite right that decades ago, that international level of financial support was not there for sports like basketball.
how long ago would that have been? It would have only 10 years, though, wouldn't it?
Possibly, maybe 15
15
20.
years,
Yeah. Yeah, but it's the same with a lot of sports these days. I mean, soccer is much better resourced these days than it ever was.
Well,
and
rugby, there are headhunters attending college games.
Exactly.
But
exactly.
not many at the Super Rugby games.
No.
Lucy Lawless on Twitter. Truthfully, to those of you who ask, if I saw a New Zealander burning our flag, I would shrug my shoulders and think, geez, that person's really pissed at the government. It would not offend my sense of identity one bit. I don't think I'm alone. May I ask how you all might feel? And lots of people told Lucy, pretty politely, I think, from the look of the thread, what they thought. So I'll ask you both what you would think of the burning of the flag, the New Zealand flag, should that occur.
Well, if I saw it happen, I wouldn't be thinking, oh, gee, that's what Lucy Lawless would do. I would think, well, that person obviously isn't proud of being a New Zealander. I am, but they have the right to do what they like, and I have the right to do to support the flag. It's not something I would do, but if people want to do it, we live in a free country, and the people who don't realise that and don't appreciate it should try doing that in China.
Mike?
I'm in agreement with Michelle. It wouldn't worry me at all. It's a purely a symbolic act. It doesn't really have much effect on me. The person who would do it, if they did it to offend me, they'd be wasting their time.
Are you clear in your mind whether it's legal or illegal to do it?
I'm not clear. I know it's illegal in America, and there's some sort of hassle going on about basketball players or baseball players who will not stand up for the American national anthem. I don't think we have that here either, do we?
I think it might be illegal.
I think it is nominally illegal, but I think
no one's ever been prosecuted.
Well, the Supreme Court, I think, decided with that Valerie Morse's flag burning during the Anzac Day service that an actual disturbance had to occur as a result of the burning. So I don't know if taking umbrage is quite enough. Most minority sports in New Zealand are in the same boat as basketball. There would be a lot of young people like Stephen Adams. I think Stephen Adams did what he did because his family couldn't afford it. Not all families have the money to support up-and-coming stars, which was the point, I think, of what he said in his book. And we should have added during the Stephen Adams discussion, of course, he does a lot of good for young people himself.
He does.
He hasn't forgotten where he came from. Well, what a lively panel. Thank you both. Tons of opinion coming in.
Look forward to seeing you again, Mike.
Yep. You too, Michelle.
Mike Williams and Michelle Bogue have been our panellists today, and we'll be back with the panel tomorrow. Thank you for your company, everybody, and Checkpoint is on the way with John Campbell.
Tautu mai rai, hoa mai he kōrero, kei te haere he kaupapa, kei te karawhiua. Welcome to Checkpoint. Tonight, 3 broken Mitsubishi Fuso buses, a fatal accident involving one, a faulty handbrake on another, and broken seats held together with wire on a third. All were taken off the road over the weekend due to safety issues, but not before they transported skiers up and down Mount Ruapehu. So what happens next? Tonight we have a Checkpoint investigation. Also tonight, why Auckland Council is chasing some Airbnb operators for backdated beer taxes, and battled Football Ferns coach Andreas Heraf resigns. The government tosses up whether to make the upcoming referendum on legalising marijuana a binding one. What impact has Auckland's fuel tax had a month on? And Weet-bix versus Weet-bix.
RNZ News at 5. Kia orana, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batten aho. 3 Mitsubishi Fuso buses are under the spotlight after 3 separate incidents on Mount Ruapehu over the weekend. A checkpoint investigation can tonight reveal 3 Mitsubishi buses, all with different owners, have been taken off the road since Saturday's fatal crash due to safety problems. These include a bus with a broken handbrake, a bus with broken seats wired together, and the bus involved in the fatal crash which killed 11-year-old Auckland schoolgirl Hannah Francis. Checkpoint will have more on this after the news. Hundreds of Airbnb hosts who owned up to Auckland Council that they're operating a business out of their homes are furious about having to pay significantly higher rates this year, while those who have stayed quiet pay nothing. The council has increased rates for online accommodation businesses to bring them into line with hotels and motels. Some Airbnb hosts are angry that they're penalised for being honest, while those who stayed silent don't have to pay. Auckland Council Policy Advisor Aaron Matich says the council knows of only about 1,500 online accommodation providers out of an estimated 8,000 in the city.
This is a new process and we are relying on a lot of information coming from the providers, and we would hope that people are going to be honest with us and provide us with information that we need to be able to do this.
Aaron Matich. A man convicted of shooting dead a road worker operating a stop-go sign has lost his appeal against his conviction and sentence. Quinton Paul Winders was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum parole period of 17 years for the murder of George Taiaroa in 2013. Katie Doyle reports.
George Taiaroa was operating a stop-go sign at a single-lane bridge near Atiamuri when he was shot in the head by Winders with a .22 calibre rifle at close range. Winders' lawyers, Jonathan Tem and Philip Morgan, argued that some of the evidence heard at the trial relating to their client's propensity for violence were inconsistent and should have been disregarded. They also said the police had not informed Winders he was a suspect during an interview and did not tell him he could consult a lawyer before answering any questions. Mr Tem also said the judge had not followed up on a complaint by some jurors that the foreperson had been bossy. Ko Katie Doyle, TNA.
The Justice Minister says the government will decide in the next couple of months whether an upcoming referendum on legalising marijuana will be binding. The referendum on legalising the personal use of marijuana is part of the confidence and supply agreement between the Greens and Labour. Under the deal, it must be held at or before the 2020 general election. Andrew Little says the government is currently considering what kind of referendum will be held.
One of the decisions that the government is going to make is whether it's a binding referendum, which would mean that once the decision is made, then the government will follow through on it. In order for a binding referendum to take place, there has to be a reasonable degree of specificity and certainty about what would follow a yes vote. So these are considerations that we're dealing with at the moment.
Andrew Little. Some jury members looked away and others closed their eyes when security camera footage of a fatal assault was played in court. Gabriel Yadi-Lohim has pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity to murdering Michael Mulholland. Edward Gay reports from the High Court in Auckland.
The footage shows Mr Yadi-Lohim pull Mr Mulholland from the doorway of his apartment, headbutt him and throw him to the ground. Mr Yadi-Lohim can then be seen repeatedly stomping on Mr Mulholland's head and kicking his lifeless body in the chest and stomach. The court had to take an early adjournment this afternoon when one juror appeared to be unwell. The Crown says Mr Yadi-Lohim assaulted Mr Mulholland because he had been ripped off in a drug deal. Mr Yadi-Lohim's lawyers say he had only been out of Auckland Hospital's psychiatric ward for 3 days and was hearing voices and suffering from schizophrenia. The trial before Justice Van Bohemen and a jury has been set down for 2 weeks. Atu i te kōti mātua, ko Edward Gay aho.
The country's leading supplier of aluminium composite panel for high-rises has pulled out of the government's troubled trademark scheme. Simon Knight of Auckland says it has simply lost faith in what the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment markets as the gold standard of building product assurance schemes. Phil Pennington reports.
The Ministry last week suspended 6 certificates covering 13 types of panel, saying they lacked evidence they were fire-resistant enough. Simonite supplies 2 of the 13 types of panel. The company says it's extremely disappointed at the suspension, which came despite it giving extensive information to the Ministry. It says it took part in Codemark in good faith, that it was well managed, but in recent months it has had cause to question its veracity. The panels are not banned, but designers can no longer rely on the Codemark certificates to prove compliance with the building code. This is Phil Pennington.
It's 5 minutes past 5. Sport, the Football Ferns coach Andreas Heref has fallen on his sword and resigned from his position. Heref, who's also New Zealand Football's technical director, was suspended last month while an investigation into his behaviour was started. A number of Football Ferns players wrote letters of complaint about Heref's dictatorial approach. The 50-year-old Austrian will take part in the current independent review into the culture of New Zealand football. A conflict over the curfew at Eden Park and India's broadcaster wanting a later start time means Auckland will get just 3 international cricket matches this summer. 2 of those matches are a Black Caps and White Ferns T20 double-header against India. New Zealand Cricket Chief Operating Officer Anthony Crummey says the timing is unfortunate.
7 till 10 if you look at a normal T20 and finished in time, and that's how it normally works. But we'd be starting these at 8 o'clock, so they would go over to the scheduled time finish would be 11, which would be too late for Eden Park, unfortunately, under its current restrictions.
Meanwhile, international cricket will return to McLean Park in Napier after a 2-year absence following an upgrade of the ground's drainage. And Southland Stadium will temporarily be renamed Wendy Frew Stadium for next week's elimination final of the ANZ Netball Premiership. The Southern Steel captain will lead her side for the last time at the venue when they take on either the Tactics or the Mystics next Wednesday. That's the news.
Commitment.
I'm fitted in blue Tegel overalls, a hairnet and plastic covers for my shoes as I head into the shed.
Confrontation.
Are you reading off the scripts there?
Yep.
Yep, because I was accidentally emailed the exact scripts that you're reading.
Heartbreak.
He just kept saying, Grandpa, come and get me, come and get us.
Humility.
I wouldn't be so immodest as to do a thing like that.
Your humble servants, Susie Ferguson and Alex Perrottet on Morning Report, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, the head of the UK's energy markets regulator on Britain's new energy price cap. Should we follow suit? And after 10, the brilliant and complex comedian Robin Williams, as portrayed by his biographer David Skoff. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Taranaki, including Taumaranui and Taupo. Scattered rain, possibly heavy about Northland and Taranaki, easing overnight. Areas of morning fog tomorrow, otherwise fine spells and isolated showers. Coromandel and Bay of Plenty, showers turning to occasional rain overnight. Rain easing to isolated showers in the west tomorrow morning. Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Taihape, high cloud and scattered rain developing this evening or overnight, becoming fine in Taihape and south of Napier tomorrow. Whanganui to Wellington, occasional rain today, but just a few showers tomorrow. Nelson and Marlborough, scattered rain clearing this evening. Fine tomorrow, but isolated showers about Nelson from afternoon. Bulla to Fiordland, rain with some heavy and possibly thundery falls. Canterbury to Southland, mainly fine with variable high cloud. Scattered rain at times south of Ashburton. And for the Chatham Islands, fine but rain developing tomorrow evening. It's 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina, and thank you everyone for joining us. We're delighted to have your company. We begin tonight with a Checkpoint investigation into shuttle buses on Mount Ruapehu. It began after RNZ learnt yesterday that the bus involved in the weekend's fatal accident, seemingly following brake failure, was a 24-year-old Japanese import that had failed its certificate of fitness 9 times over the 14 years since it arrived in New Zealand. And then Checkpoint heard of another bus with seating so seriously damaged it could not possibly pass the certificate of fitness in its current state and therefore shouldn't have been carrying passengers. We started making calls as a team and received conflicting pictures, some of them reassuring. But at the heart of it were buses often being used for short shuttle runs up and down the mountain from car parks down below. It's tough work for any bus, and inevitably most of the buses that do it aren't new or remotely glamorous. We were working on 2 incidents over the weekend when we were told of a third, a bus that kept taking passengers down the mountain even though it had no handbrake.
You stand in your lines to go to the bus that you're catching. As the bus came in, he directed us over to the far where there's a snowbank, and so we just walked towards that.
It's Saturday afternoon and we're at Whakapapa. At exactly the same time, the bus that would lose control and crash is setting out down the mountain at Turoa. Passengers on the other side of Ruapehu are also boarding a bus to head down from their day's skiing. And they can't for the life of them work out why their driver has almost gone off the road and into a snowbank.
And I looked and thought, how the heck are we going to get on this? And I got in and said to him, frickin' hell, it was actually a swear word, you've parked close to the bank, it's hard to get on. And he just laughed and says, oh, my parking brakes failed.
This was a bus going down a mountain with the driver telling his passengers he had no parking brake. And this was a different company from the bus involved in the Turoa crash at exactly the same time. So he almost had to stop the bus from rolling by putting it against the bank, is that right?
Yeah, he used the snowbank to hold him there pretty much.
This is at the top of the ride before you came down?
Yeah.
And he told you quite explicitly there was no parking brake?
Yeah.
He said that?
Yeah. He's got no parking brakes. Sorry, guys, I've got no parking brakes.
The Turoa crash bus was operated by RAL, who won't talk to us. This bus was operated by Rome Aotearoa.
The handbrake wasn't working.
Its director is Terry Stephen, and he spoke to our producer Bridget Burke. She asked him when he first heard from his driver that they were running a bus with no park brake.
Around that time, he did report to me that had happened. We took the bus off the road. We did not operate on Sunday out of respect to the family. That's on record. So we did not operate at all on Sunday. And on Monday, at the first opportunity, the bus was taken into the Whango Motors to get that issue addressed.
And so it's not in dispute. A bus with no park brake that had to be nudged into a snowbank to prevent it from rolling while it was loaded wasn't stopped then and there, but took passengers on board and drove down the hill. Why?
I'm not sure. I only found about the incident I got when the bus was down.
Last night, Checkpoint spoke to a passenger on another bus, also going down from Whakapapa, also on Saturday afternoon. Her bus may or may not have had brake issues, but what it most certainly didn't have was some of its seats.
As you can see in the photo, some of the chairs are actually held together with wire, it appears to be, or strings. And that's not even all of the chairs in the photo. Not included in the photo, the chair in front of me was fully broken, not held up by any wires, and I was trying to hold that up with my feet.
The photos Sophie Leather sent us are so striking, it almost looks as if the bus has been vandalised. One seat had a handle on its back to hold on to, and Sophie watched a passenger brace herself with it while they were cornering.
And just going around a small corner, the entire handle came off the chair. And so we were pretty all horrified at that, to be honest. We all started talking about how dangerous it was.
And all of these incidents, one of them fatal, two of them surprising and alarming, took place on Mount Ruapehu on the very same day. So, what kind of bus operations are these? You're listening to a bus loading on passengers for the trip down the mountain from just below the Whakapapa ski field. As you may have heard the driver shout, it's a shuttle service. Their cars are probably 20 minutes drive away at National Park.
So we've got a lot more people that drive to the mountain, and there's limited parking spaces in the car park facility which RAL provide at the top of the mountain road.
Jared Thomas is chairman of the Tongariro Alpine Crossing Transport and Guides Group, TACTAG, and he owns and operates Tongariro Expeditions. He's worked the mountain for decades, and where once you could head down from Hamilton or Auckland, drive your car straight up the mountain, park and jump on a chairlift, and then ski. Now there are too many cars and not enough car parks, and so
RAL put on very cheap shuttle services from National Park Village.
And you park and ride. It's cheap. RAL charges $6 return, and the buses are often basic. As revealed on RNZ yesterday, the RAL bus that crashed on Turoa, killing 11-year-old Hannah Francis, had previously failed its certificate of fitness 9 times. But at the top, passengers board, frequently wet, carrying all the gear that can't be stored under the bus, sometimes even their skis, and they just ride to car parks at or near the bottom of the mountain. Still, we were surprised to see buses working that didn't appear to have any alpine modifications at all. Transit buses, exactly as you'd see on any urban road in any New Zealand city. Are they appropriate for use on a mountain?
That's a good question. I've been around that conversation some years ago, and we actually think they're totally appropriate purely because of their layout. They've got wide door openings, so when you've got people hopping in with all their gear, their sleds, the children, one, they're low to the ground, so the step-in is nice and easy, and the opening of the doors is nice and wide. So logistically and practically, they're a much better bus to use than, say, a tour coach, for example, because they're much higher off the ground, narrow passages. They're just a better vehicle to use. They are appropriate for that work.
Jared Thomas, who doesn't, it should be pointed out, operate such shuttle buses himself, but who does see the merits of their efficiency. Colin Baker, who runs Ruapehu's scenic shuttles, a smaller, more modern and more expensive service, says what matters and what must matter is safety.
The vehicles that the RAL have got, they really should only be used for staff transport. They're not fit for purpose for public.
What vehicles are we talking about here?
The buses that they use.
So the buses they're using as shuttle buses, you're saying, are not fit for purpose?
Not fit for purpose, yeah.
Why not?
They need to be, well, they've only got 2 buses at Whakapapa that are, I mean, this is spoken from the drivers themselves, actually. There's 2 vehicles there that they're 4-wheel drives. They've got the capacity, they've got the locker storage, they are fit for purpose for carrying passengers.
And this is a tension on the mountain. A seasonal business, weather-dependent, understandably driven to get skiers up when there's skiing to be done, determined to not let cost or an absence of parking put people off. But Checkpoint has tonight established there were 3 incidents involving safety issues over the weekend, all with different operators. One of them, as we know, fatal. What they have in common, we now understand, is the type of bus, a Mitsubishi Fuso. And Checkpoint also understands none had fewer than 200,000 Ks on the clock. At least one had more than double that. The bus Sophie was on with its broken seats, it has failed its certificate of fitness 18 times in 15 years. One operator, who wouldn't be named, told us what we're seeing is the inevitable result of competing companies trying to keep costs down. Is that beginning to tell on Ruapehu? Or is it, as Jared Thomas told us, and Jared does not operate shuttles up the mountain, was not involved in any of these instances, and runs a fleet regarded as top-notch, simply a case of one truly terrible weekend?
So it's really tragic what's happened for everybody, especially for the family that have lost a child. But, you know, when you're dealing with the machinery and equipment, sometimes it fails.
Now, as you heard, there were 3 bus operators involved. The CEO of RAL is Ross Copeland. He has declined to be interviewed. He declined yesterday. He's declined again today. The Minister for Transport Safety is Julian Gender. Her office said she would not comment because an investigation into the fatal crash is underway. We've identified those 3 buses. They've all been taken off the road. Well, one of them was involved, of course, in that horrific crash. So what's happening there today? Well, our reporter Robin Martin says there is a better fleet running that route. The shuttle routes. We'll talk to Robin after 6 o'clock tonight. If you have any experience of those buses, we'd love your feedback. Text us 2101. Thousands more people are tonight fleeing their homes as wildfires continue to ravage California. The car fire raging in the northern part of the state is now so large it's creating its own localised weather system with variable strong winds, making it difficult for experts to predict which way the blaze will spread. As Bridget Burke reports, tens of thousands of people have now been evacuated.
The monstrous northern Californian fires have engulfed 100,000 acres, killing at least 6 people and destroying hundreds of homes and businesses. Ed Bledsoe's 70-year-old wife and 2 great-grandchildren were killed. He's angry nobody told them to leave.
We had no idea. Nobody told us nothing. If I'd had any kind of warning, I'd have never, ever left my family in that house.
This fire, known as the car fire, has been burning for a week. These pictures show mass destruction, the fires showing no mercy to anything in their wake.
The main thing is that people still need to be prepared to evacuate. We have some people who are not evacuated yet, and we also, again, like today, we have some people who are returning home. And those people, we just don't want them to get sort of a relaxed sense of vigilance. People still need to be packed and ready to go because the fire behavior could still be very changing and shifty. We want folks in this area to still be ready to evacuate on a moment's notice if needed.
At Shasta College, 500 evacuees take shelter. Inside, Stephen Bailey says he's used to fighting fires, not fleeing them.
Being a retired firefighter for 31 years, and I worked for CAL FIRE for a long time and everything else. It's tough being on the other side. It was being on the engine and going in. That was tough, but it was a different kind of tough when you get told to leave and you don't know anything. So yeah, it's different. I don't wish anybody to ever have to experience.
Barbara DeMarco had nowhere to go until the police turned up at her house.
I heard everybody packing up, and everybody was getting all their relatives, so we didn't have no way out. And the police officers in the car come by, and I told them, I said, we don't have no way out. Me and my nephew and my dog, and he's my caregiver too. And so he got on the radio and found an ambulance coming from Mount Shasta, and they brought us over here to the shelter.
Almost 40,000 people have been evacuated from their homes, and at least 19 people are still missing.
You know, the shelters are a really special place to be. I think there's a lot of really tragic stuff going on out there, but it's also the community spirit in shelters is amazing. The people that rally around each other and the community members that show up and support. And I think our volunteers are doing an amazing job of just giving hugs and offering meals and making sure everybody's well.
The evacuation centre is now a temporary home, not just to humans, but pets as well.
Last night, I can tell you about how quiet it was last night. After the animals being stressed from when we got in here on Friday, you could have heard a pin drop finally last night because all the animals were dead tired from barking and, excuse me.
The fires are the most destructive to strike Northern California in a decade. For Checkpoint, Bridget Burke.
And you are with Checkpoint. It's 22 minutes past 5. Some Auckland Airbnb hosts will have to pay thousands of dollars in backdated bed taxes to Auckland Council. But those who stayed quiet about their businesses won't have to pay anything. The Council's introduced a new targeted rate for online accommodation providers to bring them in line with hotels and motels. But only the unlucky ones who provided their details are being charged. Matthew Tunison reports.
Some say the new costs could spell the end of Auckland's Airbnb boom, with most of the providers at a heated meeting last night saying they'd rather close down than meet the new costs. Ray Pitch runs a small online accommodation business out of his Pakuranga home and says he was hit with an $11,000 rates bill this year. He accepts that hosts should be taxed for their earnings, but is angry at the lack of transparency in the council's approach. He says it came as a shock when he found out he will need to retrospectively pay for all his bookings since July 2017.
People are now being put in a position where they cannot afford to carry on and they can't afford to stop. Because if you stop, you're still going to be charged on the basis of what you did last year.
Airbnb is not able to provide Auckland Council with details of its hosts, and Council Policy Advisor Aaron Matic says it is relying on people coming to them to let them know if they're running businesses out of their homes. He says council officers are also able to identify some properties by going through the online accommodation websites.
It's a new process, and we are relying on a lot of information coming from the providers, and we would hope that people are going to be honest with us and provide us with information that we need to be able to do this.
Ray Pitch says it's unfair that he should have to pay while others don't.
The people that the council is aware of are the honest people who have made a declaration.
Mr. Pitch has made a complaint to the Ombudsman over the way the council has handled the new tax. Meanwhile, the council says it should be no surprise that the new tax is being applied retrospectively because all rates are set on the basis of what happens the previous year. It says the issue was canvassed in detail during consultation for its long-term plan and says hosts have been given adequate notice, not according to another Airbnb host who wished only to use her first name, Kat.
Somebody raised that they were, in the previous rates year, had been $7,000 per year and it had now been assessed under this other thing, they would be assessed at being $26,000 in a year. which is a huge amount of money for somebody to find being advised and given advance notice.
Kat also accuses the council of not taking into account the wider tourism implication of the rates, given how many people she believes will now sign off from Airbnb.
For me, the amount of effort involved, no, I think I will pull. But as I said, a number of people I spoke to at the meeting last night said that they've got bookings right through to sort of February, March next year, and they are intending to also pull.
For Checkpoint, call Matthew Tunis and Aho.
25 minutes past 5, the government is tossing up whether to make the upcoming referendum on legalising marijuana a binding one. Even if the referendum is not binding, there is now enough political support to change the law if the public votes in favour. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
A referendum on legalising the personal use of marijuana is part of the confidence and supply agreement between the Greens and Labour. Under the deal, the referendum will be held at or before the 2020 general election. Nationals leader Simon Bridges says a national-led government would enact a law change if that's what New Zealanders want.
I think we've got to. We've got to go with what the people want and what a referendum tells us. Obviously we've got a bit of water to go under the bridge. We've got to see the question. We're going to have an informed debate, I hope, on the issue, but absolutely, in principle, we support referendums and their outcomes.
The acting Prime Minister, Winston Peters, always a fan of referendums, would also support a law change.
Well, look, we don't believe in fake democracy. The referendum is a form of democracy. If the question's going to the people's answer will be paramount, yes.
The Executive Director of the Drug Foundation, Ross Bell, says public support for a law change is growing.
We've conducted a poll over the last 3 years, and we've seen during the course of that time an upward trend in support for reform, whether it's decriminalisation for personal use or whether it's legalisation for medical use. So I think the public support is increasing. The public, I think, are getting much more informed about what's happening in the world. I think there's agreement that our current approach isn't working.
Mr Bell says there's now a maturity in the debate around drugs and the issue is becoming less of a political football.
I think politicians understand that these issues are more complex. It's no longer a black and white issue. Platitudes aren't going to get us anywhere. We've seen that around synthetic cannabis deaths. We've seen that around medical cannabis debates. That there is so much complexity and nuance that politicians have to show much more responsibility.
The Justice Minister, Andrew Little, says the government is considering what kind of referendum will be held.
One of the decisions that government is going to make is whether it's a binding referendum, which would mean that once the decision is made, then the government will follow through on it. In order for a binding referendum to take place, there has to be a reasonable degree of specificity and certainty about what would follow a yes vote. So these are considerations that we're dealing with at the moment.
Andrew Little says he expects to take papers to Cabinet in the next couple of months. The government also has to decide whether to hold the referendum before the 2020 election or at the same time, bearing in mind that there's also likely to be a referendum held on voluntary euthanasia. Atu I te whare pārimata mō te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Chris Bramalaho.
We would, of course, love your feedback on that. Do text us 2101. We'll conduct our own referendum, although it probably won't be binding. After a tide of criticism from his players and staff, the Football Ferns coach, Andreas Heraf, has stood down from his position. His resignation just 6 months into the job follows an investigation into the alleged toxic culture within the New Zealand women's football team. Ravinda Hunia reports.
It's no surprise today that Andreas Heraf decided to leave. He was left with no option after members of the Football Ferns wrote a letter to New Zealand Football complaining about his dictatorial approach to coaching. New Zealand Football President Derek Shaw made the announcement this afternoon.
The New Zealand Football has received the resignation of Andreas Heraf from the role of Technical Director and Coach of the Football Ferns. Resignation is effective 31st of July.
Heraf was suspended on full pay late last month while an investigation into his coaching style was completed. A senior member of team management first raised issues and then resigned after the tour to Spain in March, where the side lost 2 matches to Scotland. Chairman of the New Zealand Professional Footballers Association, Harry Ngata, says it's probably the best outcome. He says the players want what is best for the top level of the women's game in New Zealand.
There's no doubt that a lot of them have been under a huge duress over the last few months, huge courage to come forward, and we all talked about that a few months ago, but the picture still remains one of a strategic move or a governance move as well from New Zealand football, high performance perspective as well around where that sits.
The question now is what will come of the independent review currently underway. It's looking into the culture of New Zealand football. President Derek Shaw says Haraf will be part of that review.
Part of the resignation is that Andreas has confirmed that he will fully participate with the review, and we'll look obviously to the results of the review to determine the outcomes around this matter.
Former football fern Christy Hill, who's been assisting the PFA for the last couple of months following the fallout, says only good can come from the investigation now.
Is it more than just football, and what role do we have to ensure that we're good ambassadors for the country and that we are good role models? And that's the bigger question to all of this. Football is the vehicle to us celebrating our identity and celebrating the culture that we are proud of. You know, this has been an unfortunate way of airing the conversation, but I think it's a long overdue conversation that many have been dying to have.
New Zealand football now has 3 positions to fill: Football Ferns coach, technical director and also chief executive following Andy Martin's recent resignation. New Zealand football says the search for Mr Martin's replacement will begin at the conclusion of the independent review. Mo te hōtaka o te pō nei, ko Ravinda Hunia aho.
You are with Checkpoint on RNZ. Thank you for being with us. Coming up, national calls for Pauline Kingi's resignation after revelations she endorsed Wally Homaha's skills on LinkedIn while now leading the inquiry into his appointment as Deputy Police Commissioner. What impact has Auckland's fuel tax had a month on? Speaking of Auckland and its transport chaos in State Highway 1 just north of Te Whata, south of the city. We'll try and get you more details on that, but the traffic just sounds like a disaster. And New Zealand detainees get their chance to share their stories at an international art fair. Madison is next with business news, but before it all, another viewer has complimented you on your magnificent outfit, Katrina.
It's nice. It's Paisley is in.
Yeah, Paisley's back. Anyway, before it all, here's Katrina with the headlines.
3 Mitsubishi Fuso buses operating on Mount Ruapehu have been taken off the road since Saturday's fatal crash because of safety problems. This includes the bus which rolled on the Oakune Mountain Road, killing 11-year-old Auckland schoolgirl Hannah Francis. A checkpoint investigation has found the safety problems include a bus with a broken handbrake and one with broken seats wired together. Some Auckland Airbnb hosts are angry about being penalised for being honest, while those who didn't own up don't have to pay. Hundreds of people who told Auckland Council they're operating an online accommodation business now have to pay much higher rates this year to bring them in line with hotels and motels. The council estimates they knew about fewer than a quarter of the estimated 8,000 Airbnbs in the city. A man convicted of shooting dead a road worker operating a stop-go sign has lost an appeal against his conviction and sentence. Quinton Paul Winders is serving a 17-year jail sentence for murdering George Taiaroa in 2013. Winders' lawyers claimed some of the evidence used at trial was inconsistent. The police had mishandled an interview and the judge had not followed up on a complaint that the juror's foreperson had been bossy. The Justice Minister says the government will decide in the next couple of months whether an upcoming referendum on legalising marijuana will be binding. Andrew Little says if it's to be bound by the result, the government will need specific information about what would follow a yes vote. The country's leading supplier of aluminium composite panel for high-rises has pulled out of the government's trademark scheme. Simon Knight of Auckland says it's simply lost faith in what the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment markets as the gold standard of building product assurance schemes. The tourism industry says crucial government statistics on tourist spending are a failure and it wants all 10 recommendations made by Stats NZ implemented. The quarterly survey has been reviewed by Stats NZ after long-standing criticisms from the tourist sector about the way it's done and the reliability of its results. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6 o'clock.
Thanks very much. Just before we move on to Madison, State Highway 1 is closed south of Hampton Downs. What's that, halfway between Hamilton and Auckland, roughly? Between Hall Road and Wayside Road due to a serious crash. Follow directions of emergency services. Avoid area if possible or delay your journey. This is serious. State Highway 1 is closed, full stop. stop. That doesn't happen very often at all. We'll update you once we know more. Let's turn to business news now with Madison Reedy, who is in the studio with us. Business confidence officially at pre-GFC levels. So is it as low as it was during the GFC, or lower, or where are we at?
It's roughly the same.
Wow.
I haven't actually seen the figures from pre-GFC, but it is pretty bleak.
And so this is 2008, so we're going back to
May 2008.
Right.
So these results that we've received today were from the ANZ Bank, their monthly survey, and they surveyed businesses and gauged their confidence.
And last month, I think it was Nona who told us it was heading towards GFC levels. It's got there.
It's been sliding for a while, and Simon Bridges even came out today and blamed the change in government for the reason that it has been sliding, that the private sector has that, bleak outlook. But interestingly, it's not actually just their confidence in the outlook for the economy that's sliding. So today they said 45% of the firms surveyed by ANZ said that their their outlook on the economy was grim. So they expect it to worsen. But what's probably more concerning is that the outlook on their own businesses has also slid as well. So that's at the lowest level since May 2009, post-GFC. So after the great financial crisis, as concerned as they were about how their own businesses could and would survive, they're at that same level now as well.
Right.
And another interesting thing there as well is last week from ANZ as well, we had the consumer confidence survey, and consumers are upbeat, not so downbeat as businesses are. And you would think that if consumers are willing to spend, that would keep business relatively happy.
Who interprets this? I mean, is this business, for want of a better term, packing a sad because they don't like the new government? Or is there something more substantive about this? Is this a visceral response to not liking the government, or is business actually saying there are a whole lot of indicators that look really problematic?
I mean, it's up for consultation and consideration. However, these are the numbers that are put to you, and it only really becomes an issue if the way businesses feel actually transpires to how they act.
Yeah, right.
So say they start hiring less, investing less, possibly even fire workers if they're so concerned about their own business outlook.
Then
that's when it starts to affect the economy and starts to affect your everyday people. So yes, but yeah, it was certainly interesting that retailers are the most downbeat, given that consumers seem upbeat.
Yeah, very good point. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. Thanks, Madison. Contact Energy has sold off its LPG business.
Yes, it has, for $260 million
Holy
today.
moly.
So they announced that this morning, and they sold it to the same business who actually in December last year applied to buy. They entered into an agreement to purchase their gas storage facility in the Taranaki. So they've obviously, been in a few discussions since then and said, hey, actually, we're keen to sell this arm as well, called Rock Gas, and it's LPG distribution business.
My dad, bless him, my lovely, lovely dad was general manager of Rock Gas he ran it when I was a kid. Yeah.
That is incredible.
It was the start of LPG in New Zealand. It was a very exciting time.
Well, he'll be very pleased to know that the 150 staff around the country, mostly in Christchurch, have kept all of their employment contracts, and they were notified of the sale today, and the chief executive says they are pretty happy, and he's pretty happy too, mostly because Contact is allowed to now keep selling LPG. There was a marketing alliance within that, and they are also being paid $2 million a year by this new company that's bought them, that has bought Rock Gas to keep its call centre and billing services as well. So it was a pretty competitive sale process, and Contact got what they wanted.
Fascinating. Madison, what happened on the markets?
Well, the Contact news was accepted pretty well. So the Contact shares closed up about 1%, but everywhere else it was pretty marginal. So the actual entire NZX Top 50 index closed up just a fraction, not even a whole point, at 8922. The New Zealand dollar's buying at 68.3 US cents, 91.9 Australian and 52 British pence.
Madison Reedy, thank you very much indeed. Madison, doing business news, has joined Nona on the Auckland business teams. 22 minutes to 6. National says head of the inquiry into Wally Omaha's appointment as Deputy Police Commissioner must step down or be sacked for endorsing his skills more than 20 times. On the networking website LinkedIn, the party says the endorsements by Dr. Pauline Kingi constitute a conflict of interest, but the government disagrees, calling the accusations ridiculous and frustrating. Here's our political reporter, Gia Garrick.
National's Chris Bishop is appalled Dr. Kingi hasn't been stripped of her role for endorsing the man she's investigating on LinkedIn.
How can she have confidence in the process that appointed Dr. Pauline Kingi when she has publicly endorsed Mr. Wally Omaha 23 times for a range of attributes, including for leadership, governance, public safety, crime prevention and stakeholder management?
Okay.
Dr Kingi has declared that she knew Mr Homaha in a professional capacity when she was a highly respected public servant. She has also declared that she attended a tangi either in 2015 or 2016.
The Minister overseeing the inquiry, Tracy Martin, says Dr Kingi signed a form declaring there is no conflict of interest and has made well known the 2 occasions where she met or was in the same vicinity as Mr Homaha. That includes an occasion where she was a top public servant doing work with Māori in the police, which Dr Homaha was involved with, and at a tangi they both attended. Ms Martin says she's frustrated that National has sunk to such a level.
A LinkedIn profile, a networking digital platform that somehow is supposed to be the judge of a person's character. Have you seen this lady's CV? What is the suggestion? That she can't like somebody on Facebook or endorse somebody on a LinkedIn profile and therefore somehow what? She's unqualified? That's what's frustrating.
But Chris Bishop says there is only one proper course of action.
She simply has no credibility to chair the inquiry. It is a blatant conflict of interest. She must stand down or Tracy Martin must sack her.
The acting Prime Minister, Winston Peters, described LinkedIn as a career-enhancing utility. Mr Peters says everyone endorses everyone else, and the only person that hasn't been endorsed happens to be himself because he doesn't have a profile. He has complete confidence in Dr Kingi and the process.
It's not like writing a fully fledged reference and sending it off with a signature on it. It's social media after all. You know how skitterish that can be.
Do you see any conflict of interest here?
No, I don't.
Ms Martin and Mr Peters both made the point that the inquiry is into the process of the appointment, not the person. It's been established to find out why Mr Homaha's past comments regarding a sexual assault case either weren't discovered or weren't disclosed to the Minister by the State Services Commission during his appointment process. But Mr Bishop says there's no differentiation to be made.
He is at the centrepiece of that inquiry and she has a relationship with the centrepiece of the inquiry. So I just don't think it's credible that she stay on the roll.
From Parliament for Checkpoint, Gia Garrick.
Fascinating amount of feedback coming in response to Chris Bramwell's story on the referendum. Should it be binding? Yes, you say, but then most of you just say don't even bother to have a referendum, just legalise marijuana, control it, tax it, regulate it. Let's just do something with it rather than having it as illegal. Lots of people saying they take it illegally already as medicinal cannabis. And this person says, I have Crohn's disease. I take medicinal cannabis illegally. Since I've been on this wonder drug, I'm symptom-free and have normal blood tests. I will vote National Next Election if they continue to back treating cannabis as any other prescription drug. Overwhelming support for the decriminalisation or the legalisation of cannabis. Thank you all. The Ministry of Social Development admits it used an illegal interpretation of what counts as income, but it's refusing to self-investigate how many people are being wrongfully forced to pay off debts as a result. For an unknown period of time, the Ministry decided some beneficiaries' loans counted as income. It's not known how many. The High Court earlier this month ruled that was incorrect. Loans cannot be counted as income. We've been looking at this, of course, on Checkpoint. But after diligently considering that court decision and accepting it was wrong, MSD is refusing to retrospectively identify people who suffered as a result of that incorrect application of the law. Zach Fleming brought us the story in the first instance, and he's back with some more tonight.
I reckon, mate, all of this is probably somewhere near 1,000 pages, considering that most of these are double-sided.
A stack of paper 15 centimetres thick, and it's just one debt dispute between a beneficiary and the Ministry of Social Development. Ben Hoffman, an advocate for Auckland Action Against Poverty, or AAAP, has two on the go at the moment. And how many hours will he spend on each?
I would say at least 100, if not more. These are very legally complex and evidentiarily complex cases.
100 hours to dispute a debt that potentially shouldn't even be there in the first place.
The Ministry of Social Development have essentially an unlimited war chest to throw at people and strenuously litigate them.
Ben successfully helped two people clear debts with MSD recently. Together, they totalled more than $150,000. In one of the cases, a woman was paid back nearly $15,000 that she'd already repaid MSD and had her $87,000 debt wiped. And this was because MSD incorrectly applied the law around de facto relationships in the late 90s.
every debt should be reviewed by someone completely independent from MSD, because I think there are a large number of debts that people are repaying that are actually unlawful, that MSD's got no legal rights to take that money, and because of the system, it's just impossible for such vulnerable people to challenge the system.
In the case of a woman we can only call Miss F, challenging the system takes 8.5 years and involves fighting MSD in the High Court. Frances Joychild QC represented her and successfully argued that Miss F's bank loans did not constitute income. The judge simply said they don't because they have to be paid back. MSD yesterday accepted that and won't appeal.
We look carefully at the case and we accept the High Court decision, and as a result we've decided to leave it at that and move on.
So MSD accepts that it's been incorrectly applying the law around what constitutes income, but its Deputy Chief Executive of Service Delivery, Viv Rickard, says the ministry won't look to identify beneficiaries currently paying off debts as a result of that error.
We would have had some cases in the past, but we've got 4 or 5 on the go at the moment. We encourage clients that want to engage to come and see us around this, but looking at the way we've interpreted it, it's been made in good faith. That's the law that we were following, but now we've got clarification from the High Court.
Clarification it was wrong. And yet it's up to beneficiaries to hear media reports about Miss F's case, identify their affected and then approach MSD to fight a debt they are wrongfully repaying. Ben Hoffman says that's wrong. Like Miss Joychild, he wants MSD to self-investigate
every single case where they have decided that loans were income and they have wrongfully denied assistance or established a debt against someone.
Because otherwise
they're going to be in debt for the rest of their lives.
For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
Let's go back to State Highway 1 south of Auckland. It's closed in both directions after a 4-car collision. The police say 4 people have been injured in the crash, which happened just before 4 o'clock near Hampton Downs, roughly halfway between Auckland and Hamilton. The Transport Agency is asking drivers to avoid the area and use State Highway 26, State Highway 27 and State Highway 2 as alternative routes. So what is State Highway 2? You'd turn off at the bottom of the Bombays, wouldn't you? And then head as if you were going across towards Thames, I suppose, and then turn right and go down parallel with State Highway 1, but some serious detouring going on. Apparently there are a lot of cars backed up there. We are sorry if you are stuck into that traffic, although we're delighted to have your company. The lawyer for a man accused of murder says her client was hearing voices and had only just got out of Auckland City Hospital's mental health ward when he killed another man. Gabriel Yad Elohim is accused of stomping on the head of Michael Mulholland and murdering him in September last year. He's pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. Our Auckland court reporter Edward Gay filed this report.
Gabriel Yad Elohim's lawyer Annabelle Cresswell told the jurors her client had been diagnosed with schizophrenia and was resistant to treatment. He turned up to Auckland City Hospital's Te Whetu Tāwera, the psychiatric ward, and was initially held for 5 days. That term was extended for a further 2 weeks after he was found to be psychotic and hearing voices. But Mr Yad Elohim wasn't able to stay there for the full term.
But when Te Whetu Tāwera became full on the 23rd of September 2017, 3 days before the death, Mr Yad Elohim was reviewed by an on-call consultant and discharged into respite care in the community.
He was not well.
The defence say that Mr Yad Elohim believed that God or another entity was talking to him at the time of the offending and telling him what to do.
The accused had also changed his name to Gabriel Yad Elohim, meaning messenger of God. His lawyer told jurors that both the Crown and defence agreed Mr Yad Elohim was involved in the killing.
The issue for you, ladies and gentlemen, in this trial is whether he was labouring under a disease of the mind to such an extent as to make him incapable of understanding the nature and quality of the act, or knowing that the act was morally wrong.
But the Crown prosecutor Kirsten Lummis said he was angry after being ripped off in a drug deal. She said Mr Yad Elohim met a woman on Karangahape Road and asked her to help him get drugs. He was taken to a nearby flat and told to wait in the stairwell after handing his money over, but the woman escaped over the balcony. Miss Lamas said Mr Yard Elohim realised he had been swindled and called Michael Mulholland to the door.
You will see then Mr Mulholland being pulled from the apartment and headbutted. Mr Mulholland tries to put up a fight. You'll see he swings some punches, but they're ineffectual on a much younger, fitter man.
The attack was caught on security cameras and the disturbing footage has been played in court this afternoon.
From what you can see on the CCTV, it's fair to say he's quickly rendered unconscious, and there is very limited movement from his body as it sustains a brutal beating with kicks and stomps being administered to his head and torso area.
Miss Lamas said at one point Mr Yard Elohim stopped the attack and walked off, only to return and continue it. Mr Mulholland's body was found by a neighbour later that night. Mr Yard Elohim was arrested the following day. Shortly afterwards, he was put in the custody of the Forensic Mental Health Unit at the Mason Clinic. Miss Lamas said it was hard to understand why someone would be so outraged about losing $200 that they would kill someone.
Truth is stranger than fiction. It's crazy, it's odd, misguided, but not legally insane, the Crown would say.
She said it was up to the defence to satisfy the jury that Mr Yard Elohim was insane at the time, and whilst he had schizophrenia and was unwell, that was separate to the motivation for the attack. Miss Lamas said the incident was also complicated by Mr Yard Elohim's use of methamphetamine and cannabis. The trial before a jury and Justice Van Bohemen has been set down for 2 weeks. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Edward Gaiaho.
9.5 to 6. A battle between two breakfast cereals has been played out in the High Court in Christchurch. Sanitarium, which makes Weet-bix of course, is pursuing a civil suit against a local shop owner who was importing and selling the British cereal Weet-bix. The cereal manufacturer says the imported version sounds too similar to its own brand. Dan Dalgetty filed this report.
Justice is usually being served in the High Court, but today's serving was more about what we have for breakfast. An assortment of cereal boxes, including Weet-bix and Weet-bix, line the tables as the dispute rumbled on. At the centre of it is Weet-bix, a similar product to New Zealand's own Weet-bix, but one made in the UK. Sanitarium asked Customs to stop a shipment of Weet-bix from entering the country last year, as it felt its trademark was being breached by the product. The culprit was being sold and imported by Lisa Wilson, who owns a store selling UK products to homesick Brits, known as A Little Bit of Britain. She told the court she doesn't think there is any risk of confusion or deception through selling the product.
The Weet-bix box actually has a UK price in pounds sterling written on the front, as can be seen from the box. I have never had any people asking why our Weet-bix are so expensive, thinking they were New Zealand products. They know that they are British Weet-bix, as we sell British groceries.
Lisa Wilson says the clock is ticking on getting her order of Weet-bix released by Customs, so she can recoup the cost of bringing it into the country.
I want to get the stock released as soon as possible since the goods are perishable, but I'm not prepared to relabel it because I do not accept that Sanitarium can interfere. I am prepared to provide an undertaking that the company and I will only sell the products through our specialist retail stores and specialist website, and have already offered this to Sanitarium.
Miss Wilson's lawyer, Kevin Glover, says they accept that Weet-bix is similar to Weet-bix, but that is where the similarities end.
There are only some people who are going to walk through the doors to look at the shop, and then if they go into the store and they actually want to purchase, chances are they are a British expat who knows the product and will not be deceived or confused.
A lawyer speaking on behalf of Customs New Zealand told the court that its chief executive was the person who made the call to detain the Weet-bix, which remains under lock and key to this day.
The chief executive's position is, in short, that Section 1493 of the Act was lawfully exercised in this case, and that the goods were and continue to be lawfully detained by the chief executive. The chief executive's submission is that an extension can be granted under Section 1493 after the prescribed 10 working days have elapsed.
Sanitarium says it offered to pay to have the Weet-bix logo covered, but this was turned down by Miss Wilson. The company has previously said the issue is Weet-bix potentially coming into New Zealand and cashing in on a brand that New Zealanders love. The case is due to wrap up tomorrow, with a decision on whether there has been a breach of the Weet-bix trademark likely to be reserved. In Ototahi for Checkpoint, ko Dan Dalgety TNA.
From Ototahi to south of Auckland, Jeremy Rees, one of our bosses, is sitting in the traffic. Jeremy, you stuck in the traffic as you head from Auckland to Hamilton?
No, I'm doing it the other way around. I'm coming back from Hamilton to Auckland, so I'm heading northbound very, very slowly and largely parked about 800 metres south of Te Kaupapa. And myself and a number of lots of other cars, as far as I can see, are quietly sitting here stationary on a lovely, gloomy night.
Yes, stationary on State Highway 1, and we understand it's also stationary going the other way. So you're heading north to Auckland. South from Auckland is also stationary in the same area, we're told.
Right. Well, I can see a number of cars, a couple of cars heading south, but they probably detoured.
Yeah.
So every now and then a car will pass us and will smile and wave, but we, on the other hand, are sitting here listening wonderfully to your reports on Checkpoint.
Thank you so much. How long have you been there for? Jeremy?
Only about 10 minutes.
Oh,
I
okay.
rather stupidly thought I'll pick one more thing before the turn-off and misjudged it, I'm afraid.
Okay, good luck. I hope it clears soon. Thanks, Jeremy. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, State Highway 1 closed in both directions near Te Kaupapa, around Hampton Downs there, for those of you who know the area. New Zealanders being held in Australian detention centres will get the chance to share their stories live on screen at an international art fair from tomorrow. The live installation is the brainchild of New Zealand artist Kushla Donaldson and is named 501s after a section of the controversial Australian Immigration Act. Almost 300 detainees and those who have already been deported from Australia will share their experiences through text messages, which will appear on a large screen live at the Melbourne Art Fair. Katie Scotcher reports.
There are more New Zealanders than any other nationality in Australian immigration detention, with 173 being detained as of May. One of them, Louise, which is not her real name, was born in New Zealand but calls Australia home. She spent the last 5 months at the Villawood Detention Centre in Sydney. She says she doesn't have a criminal record, but she doesn't meet the good character grounds to stay.
I feel angry. I'm frustrated because for the simple fact that I had no idea of what was going on with myself when I re-entered, and I only come home to be with my children. I have 5 children here, all born Australian.
Aaron Fall was also born in New Zealand, but at the age of 5 in 1980, he was adopted by an Australian family and crossed the ditch. Aaron was sentenced to 8 years in prison for drug trafficking charges in 2013, and when he was released early, he was told by officials he was not an Australian citizen and was deported. He spent a year in New Zealand before being told he could move back home in late 2016, but at the Australian border he was detained again and deported back to New Zealand. Aaron has an Australian passport and birth certificate, and since his deportation he has missed the birth of his first grandchild and 4 funerals.
It's soul-destroying. You just knew, great, this is just another bad chapter in my life that what can you do about? There's nothing I could have done. I couldn't get legal representation, no legal aid. Yeah, it was just a struggle. I just had to grin and bear it and keep a smile on my face, so to speak.
Both Louise and Aaron have been sending text messages of their experiences to artist Kushla Donaldson, which will be shown on the large screen at the Melbourne Art Fair. Detainees can also text in live from tomorrow when the fair opens. Kushla Donaldson couldn't say exactly how people were able to text in, but that there are 280 people participating. Detainees had been denied access to their phones until last month, when the Australian Federal Court ruled border forces could not mandatorily confiscate property. The messages will appear unedited and will interrupt a video of a glass slipper as it is filled with champagne, inspired by events at the Carnival of Venice in the 1600s. Kushla Donaldson says she expects some criticism, but the stories need to be told.
I think it's time that people, and artists in particular, engage with the fascisms that are occurring, and not just overseas in our backyard. And it's so important to take care of people who have been forcibly removed from participating in a society and culture.
501s is on display until the 5th of August. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi ko Katie Scotcher tēnei.
Right, what I can tell you about yourselves as an audience is that you believe in binding referendum, Just like Winston Peters, you believe in legalising marijuana. You very strongly believe it shouldn't be a criminal offence, particularly not for medicinal or personal use. Overwhelmingly strongly believe that. And you like terrible puns. Sanitarium, Weet-bix versus Weet-bix. Lol, they're looking for a serial killer, says one person. Actually, I quite liked it. That's because I am a dad and that was just a classic dad joke. Someone else says, how can the original version of the cereal be breaching sanitarium's rights? Sanitarium don't even pay tax. Lots of feedback coming in support of binding referendum. Lots of people asking why, whether it's SOF, certificate of fitness, as opposed to warrant of fitness, whether failing that is simply a procedural thing, whether you go along and the SOF tells you what you have to get fixed. We'll have more on that after 6. And also after 6, the fuel tax and its introduction into Auckland. What difference has it made to people for whom the fuel tax is almost the straw that broke the camel's back on the expense front? Are they driving less? Have people noticed the difference? Has it changed motoring habits? Tom Furley's looking at that for us after 6. All of that coming up.
RNZ News at 6. Kia orana, good evening. Ko Katrina Bat in Aho. 2 other Mitsubishi Fuso buses with serious safety problems were also operating on Mount Ruapehu on the same day as the fatal crash. 11-year-old Hannah Francis died on Saturday after the crash, but Checkpoint has revealed that another bus had a broken handbrake and another had broken seats wired together. An unnamed passenger heading off the mountain from the Whakapapa ski field says she couldn't understand why the bus was almost off the road in a bank when she went to get on.
I looked and thought, how the heck are we going to get on this? And I got in and said to him, frickin' hell, it was actually a swear word. You've parked close to the bank, it's hard to get on. And he just laughed and says, oh, my parking brakes failed.
A passenger boarding a bus from Whakapapa ski field. The director of Rome Aotearoa, Terry Stephen, confirmed the handbrake on the bus had failed. He says the bus was taken off the road on Monday, but he couldn't say why the driver still took passengers down the mountain on the Saturday. Some Airbnb hosts say they're going to leave the online accommodation service as a result of a new Auckland council tax. A new targeted rate for online accommodation providers aimed at bringing them in line with hotels and motels means operators who owned up to the council will have to pay thousands of dollars in higher rates. One Airbnb host who wished to only use her first name, Kat, says she'll probably close down her business because of the significant new costs. She says others are doing the same. The council has come under fire from Airbnb hosts who say they were not adequately notified about the rates increase and because it will be applied to all bookings they've had since July 2017. Nationals calling for the woman heading an inquiry into the appointment of Deputy Commissioner of Police Wally Homaha to step down or be sacked. Pauline Kingi is leading an investigation into the process that led to Mr Homaha being made Deputy Police Commissioner, despite comments he made defending police officers accused of rape in 2004. It's been found that Dr Kingi endorsed Mr Homaha on the website LinkedIn for skills including leadership, crime prevention and stakeholder management. Nationals Police spokesperson Chris Bishop says that adds up to a conflict of interest and wants the government to sack Dr Kingi and start again.
She simply has no credibility to chair the inquiry. It is a blatant conflict of interest. She must stand down or Tracy Martin must sack her.
Chris Bishop. The minister in charge of the inquiry, Tracy Martin, argues there is no conflict of interest and she says the accusations are frustrating. She says the inquiry is looking into the process which saw Mr Homaha appointed, but not him as a person. The government is satisfied there's no conflict of interest based on endorsements on social media. US intelligence officials have warned that North Korea appears to be building new ballistic missiles in spite of warming ties with the Trump administration. The officials say they have new satellite images of the work. The BBC's Laura Bicker reports from Seoul.
The news agency Reuters and The Washington Post both quote unnamed US officials who claim photos and infrared imaging show vehicles moving in and out of the missile site at Sanungdong, just outside Pyongyang. It's not clear what, at this stage, they could be carrying. Sanamdong is where North Korea built its first long-range missiles believed to be capable of reaching the US. Commercial satellite imagery also appears to show 2 new buildings at the site. These reports are the latest to suggest ongoing activity at North Korea's weapons facilities, despite the meeting between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un.
Laura Bicker in Seoul. An Australian climber who activated an emergency beacon in Mount Aspiring National Park today will have to wait till tomorrow for a rescue team to reach him. The Maritime New Zealand Rescue Coordination Centre says the man, who is in his late 20s, was due back yesterday afternoon after leaving on his own to climb last Friday. Its Senior Search and Rescue Officer, Tracy Brickles, says this morning a friend told police he was overdue. She says rescuers have gone in as far as they can tonight.
The weather is appalling in the Aspiring National Park today. The helicopter has taken the Alpine Cliff Rescue Team from Wanaka as close as possible, and they will wait for a break in the weather.
Tracy Brickles says the forecast suggests there should be a window for rescuers to go in tomorrow afternoon. More tests for firefighting foam contamination are about to begin around Ruapehu Air Base in West Auckland. This follows the Defence Force detecting the chemicals called PFAS at the base itself. Phil Pennington reports.
PFASs are man-made chemicals that last an extremely long time and accumulate in the body, though the health risks from them are uncertain. Testing at Ruapehu will now be extended to include ground and surface water on nearby properties. Tests will also be done on marine life in the harbour. Other testing aims to determine if bores that people are using nearby are protected from contamination by a layer of fine sediment, as appears to be the case. The Environment Ministry says drinking water at the airbase, Ruapehu School, the village centre on Brigham Creek Road and Hobsonville Special Housing Area are not affected. A nationwide investigation has confirmed foam contamination elsewhere in Auckland, with high levels at parts of Devonport Naval Base. Call Phil Pennington, Aho.
Part of State Highway 1 south of Auckland is closed in both directions because of a 4-car collision. Police say 4 people were injured in the crash, which happened just before 4 o'clock this afternoon near Hampton Downs. The Transport Agency says drivers should avoid the area if possible. It's 6 minutes past 6. Sport. The football community is continuing to react to the news of the Football Ferns head coach Andreas Heraf's resignation. Heraf, who was also the technical director, was placed on suspension last month after a tide of criticism from his players and staff. The New Zealand Professional Footballers Association chairman, Harry Ngata, commends the players and staff for stepping forward and says Heraf's resignation doesn't complicate the ongoing review into the culture at New Zealand football.
New Zealand Football's decision, first and foremost, to suspend him while the investigation was taking place, and then obviously his future would be determined post the review. For Andreas to make the decision to resign and to walk away now doesn't create any difficulties, or in that respect, from our perspective, from a player's perspective, the review will still take place. There will still be recommendations.
Harry Ngata. The New Zealand women's hockey coach Mark Hager says they'll have to review their preparation for the World Cup after a miserable failure in London. The Black Sticks failed to reach the quarter-finals after losing 2-0 to Argentina this morning. Hager doesn't feel there was a hangover from their Commonwealth Games success in April, but says they'll have to address that also.
We actually spoke about that today, is around coping with success. And we knew that, the Commonwealth Games is a good tournament, but it's not the World Cup. We played well there, but then you got to do it again. And there's plenty of time in between that and here, so really no excuses.
Mark Hager, that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Nick Bollinger samples the latest from the John Too Good outfit, The Adults. There's a window on the world of the British journalist Harold Evans, still going strong at the age of 90. And our native fish geek Stella McQueen wades against the current in search of cockapoo spawn.
It was a rite of passage when I was growing up that you got sunburnt and you peeled and then someone pulled the peel off, and that went on month after month over summer.
The lengths that young people go to, including my daughter's age group who's in her 20s, they are completely afraid of it and deeply aware of the need to take care.
That's Lately with Karen Hay, 10 p.m. weeknights on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland to Taranaki, including Taumaranui and Taupo. Scattered rain, possibly heavy about Northland and Taranaki, easing overnight. Areas of morning fog tomorrow, otherwise fine spells and isolated showers. Coromandel and Bay of Plenty, showers turning to occasional rain overnight, rain easing to isolated showers in the west tomorrow morning. Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Taihape, high cloud and scattered rain developing this evening or overnight, becoming fine in Taihape and south of Napier tomorrow. Whanganui to Wellington, occasional rain today but just a few showers tomorrow. Nelson and Marlborough, scattered rain clearing this evening, fine tomorrow but isolated showers about Nelson from afternoon. Bulla to Fiordland, rain with some heavy and possibly thundery falls. Canterbury to Southland, mainly fine with variable high cloud, scattered rain at times south of Ashburton. And the Chatham Islands, fine but rain developing tomorrow evening. It's 9 minutes past 6 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten, and thanks everyone for being with us. We began the program an hour ago with an investigation into shuttle bus safety on Mount Ruapehu. Our investigations have revealed 3 separate incidents over the weekend involving ageing Mitsubishi Fuso buses. One of the buses was involved in the fatal crash which killed 11-year-old Auckland schoolgirl Hannah Francis. The other had broken seats, some of them wired together after a staff party. It was still being used in that state to carry passengers up and down the mountain. And the other had a broken handbrake, again being used to take passengers up and down the mountain. All the buses, one with more than 500,000 k on the clock, have been taken off the road now, but all were transporting skiers up and down Ruapehu on Saturday. Terry Stevens, the director of Rome Aotearoa, his bus had the failed handbrake and was operating at the same time as the fatal crash. The reason the passengers knew there was a broken handbrake is that the bus, to remain stationary, to stop it from rolling as it was loading passengers on, drove gently into a snowbank. So it stayed still. Mr. Stephen told our producer Bridget Burke the bus is now being repaired and is undergoing a safety inspection, and he took it off the road as soon as he knew there was a problem.
Well, around that time, he did report to me that had happened. We took the bus off the road. We did not operate on Sunday out of respect to the family. That's on record. So we did not operate at all on Sunday, and on Monday, at the first opportunity, the bus was taken into the Whango Motors to get that issue addressed.
And so when he was at the top of the mountain and had realised the park brake, or in this case what is actually the handbrake, had failed, were there any attempts by him or your company to find an alternative vehicle to descend the mountain, or was the decision made that it would be better and safe enough to take the passengers down?
I'm not sure. I only found about the incident I got when the bus was down.
Can you just explain to me what way that you normally manage your vehicles on this particular kind of terrain? You were talking to me before, Terry, about the way that you drive them and manage the vehicle.
Right. The terrain has 2 characteristics. One is that there's a very steep drop over a short space of time, 500 metres. And the other one is that from obviously at times it can be ice covered. So the key issues around those are when descending on ice or on a normal road, it's critical that the engine does the braking, not the brakes. And this is on any vehicle. Do you understand that?
Yes, and so you would be operating a manual gearbox.
Manual gearbox, and you descend using basically the retardant force of the engine through the gears. And that's on a normal road, like a tar-sealed road that's in normal condition, that's an extremely safe way to come down, because the engine will always retard. On ice, we fit chains, and we use the same technique, which is recognised as the safest way to do it. So the brakes are used purely for adjusting speed to change gears, as opposed to providing the retardant force to keep the bus from speeding up. And that's our fundamental principles of operating the vehicle.
And you've been operating...
And the handbrakes are relevant. The handbrake is of no use whatsoever down the hill. If you've got one or not, it's not going to help you in any way whatsoever.
So it doesn't matter that the vehicle hasn't got a handbrake?
No, it doesn't matter. But if you're descending, once the bus is moving, the handbrake will not do anything.
Well, because the sheer mass and momentum of the body roll.
Yeah. You need, no bus handbrake's going to stop the bus.
So you hand on hard.
We would never operate in a way we're relying on the handbrake to provide any retardant force once the bus is moving.
Have you ever had any problem with your brakes, given the make and model Mitsubishi Fuso? Have you had any problems with your brakes before?
None whatsoever. We've been operating for 10 years on that road and never had a brake failure.
And you've been operating 10 years on that road with the Mitsubishi Fuso?
Well, at least one. We've got 3 now.
Have you retired those in the wake of this tragic accident in Tudo, or are you still using them?
We've got one. We've got one in the workshop, which is the one we've discussed, and is getting a full brake check, and the others will get a full brake check as well. I really, at the moment, given that there's a dual braking system on these buses, so if one brake system fails, the other one would still be functioning perfectly fine. And all we're using the braking for is to adjust speed as opposed to actually provide braking as such. I don't see a need to do this at the moment. These buses all over New Zealand, they're everywhere. They're in school routes, whatever. I don't think anybody else is taking them off the road. They're properly maintained.
Sure.
And the way they're operated and the backup safety they've got indicates to me that we don't have an issue, plus my experience with them.
Why did you put the vehicle we've discussed into a workshop once you knew that the handbrake had failed?
Are you seriously asking that question? Sorry. Wouldn't you?
Well, I'm just wondering, are you getting a new handbrake fitted?
Well, it's being repaired correctly, whatever it takes to bring it up to perfect condition.
3 buses, Mitsubishi Fusos, on the mountain over the weekend with issues. That one with the faulty handbrake, another with the completely dodgy seats, and of course the one involved in the crash. Our Taranaki Whanganui reporter Robin Martin has spent the day on Mount Ruapehu, and he found an altogether fresher and more modern fleet operating today. He's told us this afternoon he used an RAL $6 shuttle to travel up and down.
Look, I've been on the shuttle twice today. I caught the last one up, I think, or second to last one up this morning. It was a late model Mercedes-Benz 22-seater. Every seat had a seat belt, and on the way up we weren't exactly encouraged to use them, but on the way down, the driver in the afternoon was a young man named Chris, who seemed to know half the people on the bus. He insisted that everybody put their seatbelt on before we took the bus down. My feelings about how the drivers undertook the journey was that they both drove very responsibly, particularly in the higher reaches of the mountain. They took it very slow. We were down virtually to walking pace on some of those big hairpins up there. I couldn't fault them. They didn't take any passengers beyond the 22 seats. Those buses were fine.
Right. What are people saying who are up the mountain today and who may or may not have used shuttle buses to get up there?
Yeah, well, there's been a mixed kind of response. I sat in the cafe around midday, and I spoke to one family group. They'd actually come up in 2 different cars, but the woman who was looking after the children, she was a diesel mechanic herself, and she said, look, this can happen. And we had a brief chat about those CFOs, or those certificates of fitness that I think heavy vehicles have to have. And she said that those are really, really stringent, and it's actually not surprising that occasionally they that buses fail them. And a family nearby, they'd driven up, but the father said, I wouldn't feel comfortable coming up in a bus at the moment. We need to know what the outcome of the investigation is before I would step on one of those buses again. His partner, they had 2 wee kids with him as well. She was more like she was upset about the lack of transparency from Ruapehu Alpine Lifts over the last couple of days. She thought that they could be a little bit more open, and none of these people are forgetting the family that's been most affected by this accident. Everyone's referred to the family that's lost a daughter, and the other person a lot of people have spoken about is the bus driver. Locals in particular, there's a whisper going around that this bus driver who apparently is quite shaken up. I spoke to some people connected to the company this morning, and they said he's quite shaken up. Time will tell, but what we're hearing is that that he did remarkably well to get the bus down in the way he did, and things could have been a lot worse.
Robin Martin from the bottom of Mount Ruapehu. Some Aucklanders have been putting the brakes on driving since the regional fuel tax boosted petrol prices. The 11.5 cent a litre fuel tax has now been in effect at the pumps for a month. What difference is it making? Well, our reporter Tom Furley hit the streets to ask people how they're coping.
Drivers hoping to fill their petrol tank around the CBD after work today can expect to pay between $2.30 and $2.35 a litre of unleaded 91. A quick drive north, depending on traffic and whether there's a breakdown on the Harbour Bridge, takes you to the suburb of Birkenhead, where prices get cheaper. Not long after getting off the motorway, you'll be charged $2.22 at the BP on Onewa Road. But if you drive another 5 minutes down the road, you'll find the cheapest petrol in town at Gull at $2.07. It's a self-service station, so there were no staff to talk to, but if there were, they'd be kept busy as a steady stream of customers rolled through. 20-year-old student Brenna Halligan is putting diesel into a four-wheel drive.
This is my mum's car, but my car used to cost $30 to just get half a tank, but now $30 is like a quarter, and it's like, it's just like a massive difference.
Brennan now thinks twice before getting behind the wheel.
So I've just tried to stop driving anywhere and just really stop trying to drive, and if I have to drive, try and find the cheapest one, like look up online what the prices are and all that kind of thing.
Tony Warren is an engineer who travels around the country to service machinery.
I tend to fill up in the Waikato if I can, usually quite a bit cheaper down there. But if you shop around in Auckland, you can get a good price. Down the road, it's $1.50 for diesel. It's $1.39 here, so it's 11 cents difference.
For travellers using the airport, the nearby Z Energy petrol station charges the most at $2.36 a litre. The fuel price comparison app Gatsby has continued to see strong growth in people signing up. Its co-founder Larry Green says while things have slowed after an initial jump in numbers when the tax came into effect, around 700 people are still joining each day.
It is absolutely having an impact on people, and I think it's obvious to say that people are not pleased with it, and I think with the next lift for the national tax increase, it's going to be a continued little punch in the guts for consumers.
That nationwide increase, in the form of a petrol excise duty, will raise costs by 3.5 cents a litre from October, with further hikes of 3.5 cents in both 2019 and 2020. Back at the Birkenhead Gull, Terry, a pensioner, keeps an eye on prices every day and says further increases will have a big impact on people like him.
And it'll always be a concern as a pensioner with limited income. If it keeps going up, what do you do? Stay home. The older you get, the less inclination you have to go out. So I suppose that's what'll happen. I'll stay at home.
There's no public information yet about how much money the regional tax has brought in so far. However, the first payment from the fuel companies to the transport agency is expected at the end of August. In Auckland for Checkpoint, Tom Furley.
Hearing from lots of people elsewhere in the country who say their petrol is still more expensive than Auckland's. Goodness. Vote counting is underway in Zimbabwe in the country's first election since its independence. It's also the country's first election in which Robert Mugabe's name has not been on the ballot. And voter turnout is said to have been more than 70%. The main opposition party is hoping to defeat Mr Mugabe's old ZANU-PF, now led by Emerson Mnangagwa, the man who helped force him from power. The BBC's Fergal Keane is in Harare.
Just a year ago, they believed democracy was a sham. A rigged exercise designed to keep an ageing tyrant in power. But today felt like something very different. African laughter and the high hopes of long-suffering people.
I would like everybody to be employed. I would like some clinics to have medicine. I would like people to go to school, more schools, more clinics, more jobs for everyone.
This day, I'm very hopeful for a new Zimbabwe. I'm very happy that I'm able to make a change. My decision is being considered for a better Zimbabwe. So I'm happy and hopeful.
It was peaceful across Zimbabwe, in the rural areas of Matabeleland, and in Midlands province, where the man who overthrew the old regime cast his vote. Once an enforcer for Robert Mugabe, he's gambling voters will thank him for bringing change.
I'm happy that both the process for campaigning was peaceful. The voting today is peaceful. I have no doubt that the end process of the entire electoral process will remain peaceful.
In the capital Harare, stronghold of the opposition Movement for Democratic Change, its young leader Nelson Chamisa arrived at a local school to vote. He's campaigned energetically for months.
How's it going? Is it going well? Thank you.
Very good, he said.
Nelson Chamisa just after voting. It is chaotic, but it is democracy, as Zimbabwe has never known it before.
A few moments later, I caught up with him again.
Will you accept the result even if you lose?
I've told you that we are not losing in this election, we are winning this election. So I'm not interested in impossibilities.
So you're confident?
We'll win this election to the extent that it's a free and fair election, particularly in the rural areas. But it's a done deal.
It's been a hard road to this place. The mess that Zimbabwe became is rooted in the bitter struggle against white minority rule. Thousands were killed before independence brought hope. But the heroes of liberation became despots. Zimbabwe might have become an enduring success story. But over time, ordinary lives became hostage to the terror of Robert Mugabe's one-party rule. Millions fled, like Tavadzwa Musakiwa, who spent 15 years in exile in Britain. Now he's come back as an election observer.
I think this is what it should have been. This is what everyone has always advocated for. So what we're getting now, obviously it's not perfect, but I think it's quite commendable. We can't take away the fact that this has been very peaceful.
With voting over, they were preparing to count tonight. This was the scene in one Harare polling station. This day passed in peace, but the days to come, when a victor is declared, will prove the ultimate test of Zimbabwe's democracy.
The BBC's Fergal Keane, gosh, he's good, isn't he? 6:26. Just before we go tonight, it doesn't take too much to tickle the fancy of social media users on occasion. In fact, in this case, it was just one word. Donald Trump's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, sparked a new wave of internet gags over the last 24 hours. The former New York City mayor mysteriously tweeted the single word, you, opening up the floodgates for memes and jokes. His 3-character messages so far received more than 21,000 comments, 7,000 retweets and tens of thousands of likes. This report from CNN.
For a guy who's been talking a lot, it was the tiniest of tweets. One little lonely word posted early in the morning, you. You what, wondered Twitter. Twitter decided to finish Rudy's tweet for him.
You are so beautiful, honey, you are my shining star.
The good news for Rudy is that many songs beginning with you tend to be adoring.
You make me feel brand new.
Though there was the occasional downer.
You don't bring me flowers.
Responded someone else, he could never be a natural woman, referring to the time then Mayor Giuliani.
You know, you're really beautiful.
Dressed in drag for a charity dinner and got nuzzled by the man he now represents.
Oh, you dirty boy, you, oh.
While most finished Rudy's tweets, Kellyanne Conway's husband filled in the blanks before the you.
It had to be you.
And if song lyrics don't do it for you, how about movie lines? Someone recruited a few good men to complete Rudy's thought.
You can't handle the truth.
But Rudy sure has been handling lies, accusing Michael Cohen.
He's a bad liar.
Someone completed Rudy's "You" with a song played at Trump rallies. Sort of reminds us of the time President Trump posted that just after midnight head scratcher.
Kofifi, huh?
Only Rudy's is an actual word. Maybe he was about to tweet, "You have the right to remain silent." So far, Rudy has remained silent about the inexplicable.
Yo.
Wonderful you.
It was just a series of dad jokes, really, wasn't it? Joined together. Excellent. Nice way to end the show tonight. Lots of feedback coming in. By golly, we haven't really heard from terribly many people. Maybe 5 or 10% of you oppose the referendum being binding on cannabis and the idea that it is probably going to be legalised if that's what the referendum says. Overwhelming support for it off the back of Chris Bramwell's story tonight. Thank you. It's always really nice to hear from you, and I often can't guess which way you're going to go on an issue. This one, you have been overwhelmingly in favour of legalising, or in some cases decriminalising, cannabis, although some of you pointing out the irony of New Zealand heading towards a smoke-free country at the same time as we might find something else to smoke. Thank you for your feedback. Thank you for your company. We really appreciate it. On behalf of the excellent and hard-working Checkpoint team, that is the program for this evening. But we hope to enjoy your company again tomorrow night from 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The government has no plans to replace Pauline Kingi as head of an inquiry into the appointment of Deputy Commissioner of Police Wally Homaha. Some Airbnb hosts in Auckland say they'll pull out of the online accommodation service as a result of a new council tax. It's been revealed that another 2 Mitsubishi Fuso buses with serious safety problems were operating on Mount Ruapehu on the same day as the one which rolled, killing an 11-year-old girl. An Australian climber who needs to be brought out of Mount Aspiring National Park will have to wait till tomorrow for helicopters to be able to reach him. And US intelligence officials have warned that North Korea appears to be building new ballistic missiles. Our next news and weather is at 7.
If John Toogood's latest project with the adults can be classed as world music, it's for the most